Hello and welcome to yet another video, and in this video I have a very nice camera to share with you guys. It's this one right here. It's been a camera that I personally have been enjoying using lately, and also one I've been taking to a lot of places lately as well. It's been a very portable, very light camera to use as well, and the one that it's been very flexible to use as well. So yeah, in this video I would like to talk about this camera, what I like about it, what I don't like about it, why I recommend it, and why I don't really recommend it as well. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So the Sony NEX3, now this camera, despite being out for quite a while now, and don't quote me on this, but I think it's been out since 2010. Either way, it is over a decade old. Despite being over a decade old, it is still a very nice camera to use, one that actually still outputs really nice results. If you want to print, let's say, A2 or even A1 size images, it's definitely more than capable to, print out those, well, not print out, but deliver images that renders really great details for those prints. So yeah, and just like in any of other My Thought videos, I will be dividing this video into 3 different sections. And of course, it's not a full review, it's just my opinion based on, how I use this camera. So on the first section, I'll be touching on the ergonomics, the operational side of things on this camera, and then leading down into the image quality, and then into my conclusion. So let's first start with the first section, which is the ergonomics and the operational side of things on this camera. Well, this camera, despite being an old camera, it actually doesn't feel that bad. Yes, it feels very plasticky because it came out roughly the same time as the NEX5, where, it's supposed to feel more premium, and this was just their entry level. And you can really feel that. It's not only that it's plasticky, well, it is somewhat comfortable and very light, but it's also very limited in terms of button layout. And that is something that you can find very annoying at some point, especially if you have to set your own white balance, set your own specific ISO, or set your own certain manual features. Because this, obviously they thought that it was going to be for pure beginners, shooting mainly at creative modes, full automatic modes, where people don't really want to access into the menu system or set their own manual functions. But if you're a type of photographer like me who just like to set their own manual features, manual functions, manual settings, things like that, you will always have to fiddle through the Sony menu system, which is somewhat organized but very slow to operate because everything is designed assuming that you're a full beginner. You have all these icons and you have to access them, and then there are these explanations underneath which pops up at some point. And yeah, it's not a very quick to operate camera if you are somewhat professional or enthusiast or just know a bit more than full beginner. I just have to make that clear. But otherwise, it's a very light camera. It's a very portable camera as well. The size is very small, and if you notice, I actually mount with the adapter the vintage film era lens on this camera, simply because I love experimenting with different look on this particular camera as well. Because it's so light and so small, it's been a camera that for me, it's been a very nice experimental camera to work with. And having that APS-C size sensor means that it's not really a small, compact sensor, what you'd find in a compact camera, those really small 1-inch sensor or even smaller sensors. So yeah, that's also quite nice because in such a small body, usually in this size body, it's usually a 1-inch sensor or micro four thirds sensor or even smaller sensors. And yes, you can mount even more lenses on those, but it's not always the look that I'm after. Whereas with this, small size body, it has an APS-C size sensor, and I can always mount full frame lenses on here with that very, very small compromise, which is actually pretty good. And in this case, I love to experiment with this particular lens setup. And actually, by the time you're watching this video, I think the video might be out where I actually did a photo shoot with this particular lens, but I'm not sure yet. Yeah, otherwise, moving on to the next point, this camera does not have a built-in flash, so you would have to actually mount on this socket right here, and it doesn't have hot shoe. It's kind of too thin for a hot shoe, which is a bummer. I wish that they would actually give you a full-size hot shoe on here, but they didn't. But that's okay, I guess, especially for the form factor and for what you can be using it for. But yeah, otherwise, if you can get over the fact that there are a very limited amount of buttons here and it's not really programmable, and the buttons that you have here are not your essential buttons really, because you have to go into the menu and access your essential settings, things like that, then I think it's okay. But otherwise, for people like me who likes to control at least most of the things, it's a very fiddly camera to work with. The screen here is actually a very decent screen. For the age, you're still able to judge your exposure, your color accuracy quite nicely as well. But once you have direct sunlight or super bright daylight, this screen is going to be too reflective and sometimes your exposure can seem a little bit too dark. But just know that the screen is just, you know, not that bright, but it is definitely clear enough to judge your exposure. And it's also a tiltable screen, so kind of like this way and also up that way. So that's actually very versatile and also very flexible. The downside is that you cannot fully flip it to make it a selfie kind of screen, but you know, it's not the end of the world. Because you still can kind of predict that, and also with such a small form factor, it's not really hard to just frame a selfie out of this camera as well. On the side you have like really minimal ports, your HDMI port and your micro USB port. On the bottom is just the slot where you share with the battery and the SD card. Now, it's nice having the SD card down there. Usually I would complain a lot that you have the SD card down in the bottom section, but because the tripod hole or the tripod mount is actually kind of not in the center of the camera, but more to the side. So for most tripods plates, it will not actually get into the way of changing your batteries and your SD card, so that's a good thing. But in terms of battery life, you will definitely have to get extra batteries simply because this was the original version of the mirrorless camera batteries from Sony, and it just drains really quickly. So I would recommend getting at least 3 of these batteries if you want to last a whole day of shooting with this particular camera. So yeah, there is that. Otherwise, this camera, the autofocusing system is not super accurate, assuming if you have moving objects. Not like, just don't trust your autofocusing system that much, but if you're just focusing on like the basic of street photography, the basics of focusing on the light and shadows, the basics of focusing on the cityscape, landscape, things like that, or even food photography, it's gonna do a decent job on those. But once you introduce like some slow moving objects or shooting really slow moving portrait shoots, I wouldn't rely too much on the autofocusing feature of this camera. So yeah, there is that. But otherwise, moving on to the next point, which is the image quality. Well, the image quality on this camera is actually very nice. I really love the colors, especially coming out of this era of Sony cameras. The color has this really nostalgic kind of digital look, which is somewhat nice. At the time when this camera came out, I would probably not say this, but you know, times has changed and taste has changed, and nowadays the colors coming out of this camera can look kind of nostalgic digital vibe, which is actually quite nice character to it. And if you're shooting in RAW, the characteristics out of this camera, well, the colors out of it is actually quite nice. The file's actually durable enough to do some basic manipulation, recover a lot of highlights and shadows, and to be honest, the dynamic range out of this camera is comparable to even DSLRs from 8 or 9 years ago. So yeah, it's still quite a nice camera. And if you're just working on normal basic photography or just working on the general field of photography, this camera will still deliver really nice images. And 14 megapixels. You are still able to crop a lot into the images as well, so that's actually quite nice. And you have the APS-C size sensor in here as well, so you are still able to actually achieve that somewhat shallow depth of field look if you're going for that in such a nice and tiny body. So yeah, that's pretty good. But just like with any other entry-level old digital camera from that time period, just make sure you're not shooting too much into a super highly contrast scenarios, because you will be introducing a lot of noise into the shadow areas as well. And talking about noise, I would not recommend using it over ISO 800. 400 would be the standards, but 800 should be like the limit, because otherwise you're starting to introduce a lot of noise, a lot of colored noise into the images as well. And try not to shoot anything that has a lot of fine patterns, because you will be introducing a lot of moire and aliasing effect onto the images as well. So just be aware of those scenarios. But otherwise, the color rendition is actually quite nice. And yeah, the color reproduction is also quite nice as well. Just remember, you will have to work with the white balance quite a bit, because this camera gets the white balance off in most situations. So yeah, that's it for the image quality. Now into the video side of things. The video side of things, I'm not going to touch too much upon it. It's a basic 720p camera. I'm not even going to be doing any serious videos with it. If you're into the old digital look, then this is going to be a camera that you might like. But otherwise, 720p, and it's also very, very standard. 720p and everything is baked in with very, very low bit rate. You will be emphasizing a lot of the moire and aliasing and noise onto the images as well. It looks very soft and also overly digitally sharpened in the same time. So it's just a pile of mud, really. Yeah, I'm just gonna leave it at that. Now over into the conclusion. Well, overall, I still would highly recommend this camera, simply because, well, if you're just in it for the photography side, of course, simply because, you know, for the form factor, it has an APS-C size sensor, which is actually really, really nice. And nowadays you can find it around 60 euros. I got mine for 65 euros with 2 manual focus lenses. And of course, I'm aware that depending on which region of the world you're living in, the cost can vary, could be a bit more expensive, could be a bit cheaper. But here in kind of Western Europe, assuming you don't go for the buy it now option and you have enough patience for the bidding option, it is going to be sold at around 50, 60, 70, at most 80 euros. Of course, for the price of 80 euros, you are able to look at other options like the 550D that has higher megapixel count, more lens options at the budget level, and also shooting at full HD video as well, since that camera was also very popular with, you know, filmmakers as well at the time. But in the same time, this for 80 euros, 70 euros, 60 euros has the advantage of being very portable, and being a very small mirrorless camera, you can actually put on a lot of experimental old lenses on here as well. So not only that you will achieve really nice image quality out of this camera, but you still can do a lot of experimentation with this camera as well. Of course, there is the downside of it being a very limited camera in the way that, like, you have to go into the menu to set a lot of the manual settings. So it's going to be a time-consuming camera as well in that sense. But if you can work your way around it and know its limitations and also can work it to your advantage, this camera is still a very nice camera that still outputs great results, and one that I would really highly recommend. Even if you're dipping your toes into photography, you know, like, having such a small, simple camera to take with you everywhere means that you're actually going to be more potentially bring the camera out with you to capture your moments, your stories, your creation, versus having a heavier DSLR that does more, but you're most likely going to leave it at home because it's heavier and it's bigger and you're probably not going to carry it as much. So yeah, that's the advantage of this camera as well. Of course, I wouldn't recommend it if you're looking for a super good camera in the price range of 80 euros with, if you want like the best camera without moire or aliasing, or minimal aliasing and moire with higher video specs, again, the 550D would be the camera for that. But again, if you just want a nice portable camera that you can take with you, whether you're dipping your toes into photography, or if you're just looking for a fun camera, or if you're just like me looking for a camera to just take with you alongside your professional cameras already, but you also don't want to feel the weight or the presence of it, then this camera is a really nice option to go for, or even the NEX 5. So yeah, I hope that helps. That's my opinion on this camera based on how I use it. It's not a full review. If you need a free photography guidebook, it's absolutely for free on my website, along as my photography courses as well. The links are down in the description section below. If you have any questions, anything to share, any stories, any recommendations, feel free to also just type that down in the comment section below as well. Otherwise, I thank you all very much for watching. Stay safe, have fun shooting. Till next time, bye for now.